so that we can share this with anyone else who chooses to view it later. My name is Sarah Martin. I am an education specialist at the Department of Education, and I oversee the school district collaboration grants on the ODE side of the equation. Those of you who are here today have expressed an interest in participating in the design phase of the collaboration grant, and so that's what I'll be sharing with you today. Our purpose is really to walk through the request for application. In this PowerPoint, it is an actual link, but hopefully by now you have seen it and been able to access it. If not, I'm going to show you what it is in just a moment. We'll talk about important dates and what's required to submit if you intend to put in an application, and then answer any questions that you might have. To find the collaboration design grant application, you would go to the ODE homepage and choose Educator Effectiveness. The main landing page of the Educator Effectiveness website has a number of sub-pages, a number of links, and one of those is to the collaboration grant webpage, and if you go there, you'll find the design grant posted, along with the letter of intent that you submitted, and a brief PowerPoint on the improvement science process, and we'll talk about how that factors into the application as we go through it. So just to provide a little background in case you're not familiar, the school district collaboration grants were established in 2011, and they were through Senate Bill 252, and there was actually an amendment to that legislation in 2013. We learned some things in the first biennium, the first iteration, and so some amendments were made in 2013, but it has remained relatively stable since that time. And the OARs, in case it's something that interests you, the OARs that apply are listed here. And they're not Division 22 OARs because this is a part of the Network for Quality Teaching and Learning that was established under House Bill 3233. The collaboration grants were included in that. And the network is really designed to provide funding for a comprehensive system of support for educators, so it encompasses more than just the collaboration grants. Mentoring is another component of that network, for example. And it's really designed to create that system of support that creates a culture of leadership and professionalism and continuous improvement, really, for teachers and leaders across our P20 system. So if you participate within the collaboration grants, you are agreeing to be part of a statewide collaborative process. There is a component of this work where there's an expectation that you share lessons learned and help us scale up the work across the state. The collaboration grant ultimately has as its goal to improve outcomes for students. But the bulk of the work that takes place is really about adult behaviors and systems within districts. So the vision of the collaboration grant is really around systems change within districts that will ensure that professional learning for educators is aligned to educators' individual needs and as identified through the evaluation and support system that's in place in a district. It has a vision of elevating teacher voice in decision making and bringing forward a culture of shared leadership. It looks to provide opportunities for career advancement and leadership for teachers outside of what has traditionally been the pathway, which is, receiving an administrative credential. And we know that there are teachers who want to continue to be in the classroom, but also have the desire and, are highly skilled at being leaders. And then obviously increasing student learning and growth, as I mentioned previously. So the four elements that you see listed here, pathways, evaluation, compensation, and professional learning, are really linked to educator effectiveness and empower teachers and promote leadership. So those four areas are the focus of the collaboration grant, and you can find definitions of each of those terms on pages 5 and 6 of the RFA if you want additional detail. So the grant itself has two phases, really. There's the design phase and the implementation phase. So all of you who are here today are interested in finding out about the design phase. And as you can see from this slide, it is really about elevating problems of practice around the component areas that we just talked about and coming up with a plan for implementation of changes related to the systems within your district around those component areas. That's what design is about. So design is really a planning year, and you're using the improvement science process to elevate a problem of practice and conduct root cause analyses and come up with that plan for what those system shifts might look like in your district. Implementation grants then are for those districts who successfully submit a plan for implementation, and then you are actually going into a version of the grant where you are putting those changes into action. And I'm going to pause for just a moment because I see a note here that says, we are not seeing any slide changes on our end. So can someone else besides Doug confirm for me if you're not seeing the slide? You should be seeing a slide right now that says 2 phases. Can someone else confirm for me if you're seeing that? Okay, so Robert, you can see that. So Doug is having difficulty seeing the slide, and I'm not sure what that's about. So Doug, I apologize. Oh, and Robert Emerson says he can't see it either. And Dale can't see it either. Oh, fabulous. Hold on just a moment, please. Okay. Now, can you see it? Okay. My apologies. I had clicked on. Can you still see it? Okay, it's because you turned it off. All right, okay. There we go. All right, we should be back online. Okay. Boy, Robert Emerson, you are super duper at communication. Thank you so much for telling us that you can see it. So my apologies, I had paused the screen without knowing it. So hopefully you can see 2 phases of the collaboration grant in front of you, design and implementation. You're applying for design. Design projects will have the opportunity to apply for implementation grants in 18-19. We have received funds for the biennium. However, I do want to make clear that this is a year-to-year grant. So we have the design grant is for the 2017-18 school year. And then if you choose to apply for an implementation grant, that's contingent on participation in an interview process with the team and a presentation. So the team essentially shares with ODE and Chalkboard what their plan is for implementation, and then based on that and a written action plan application, you can be funded for implementation moving forward. So you are not guaranteed implementation just because you get design, but once you are brought into implementation, our goal is then becomes a continuation grant. And so we have 3 years of implementation has been the model that we've followed in the past. So this is really a project that crosses more than one biennium if your district participates all the way through. So I just want you to know that this year is for design, and then there will be an opportunity for projects who participate in design to apply for implementation the following year. So we're going to take a moment just to talk about improvement science. I mentioned a few moments ago that if you participate in the design grant, you'll be using the improvement science process. And you may already be familiar with improvement science, but just briefly, it's based on work done by the Carnegie Institute and is a process for continuous improvement, essentially. It uses the 6 questions that you see listed here as a frame for the work. And we found that it's an approach that increases the sustainability of the grant work and shows districts how they can use a scientific approach to improvement. The Chalkboard Project, who provides the technical assistance in the form of coaching and professional learning, first used improvement science with design districts that entered in 2015-16 and found that those projects went further faster than the districts that they had engaged with in this work using the previous model. So we've really found that it is helping districts get to looking at systems and really helped them make more progress through the work of the grant. It's a pretty straightforward process in terms of the questions that you see here. But if you want to know more about improvement science, there is on the same page where the RFA is located, there is the PowerPoint I mentioned that is an introduction to improvement science. So you can go in and take a look if you're not familiar with improvement science to see kind of what those general components are. So this is the process that design districts will commit to use should they choose to apply and be funded. So we'll talk about some of the more practical pieces of the grant first. We've got our dates here. So the application is due on August 31st to ODE. Then applications will be scored. They actually won't be scored on September 1st. That's a weekend, but that following week is when the applications will be scored, and there is a rubric that's included in the RFA for you to reference. And we anticipate being able to notify districts that second week of September about their award. Then if you are funded and participate, there are 3 quarterly reports that are due in December, March, and June. And we provide a template for that to find out what kind of progress you're making. And then in terms of funding, as I mentioned before, the funds are available for the upcoming school year, 17-18. So June 30th is the last day to expend funds to conduct grant activities related to the design grant. And then you have through August 14th to claim those funds. As we get closer to that June date, we will be talking with districts about the implementation grant opportunities and giving you timelines for that so that you'll have the ability to move the work forward seamlessly between design and implementation should you choose to move forward after your design year. In terms of requirements, because this is a competitive grant, we do need to have some uniform requirements, which you see listed here. I will not read them, with the exception of the 4th bullet, which says 10-page narrative maximum. So in a moment, we'll talk about the 2 components, the 2 sections of the grant, as well as the appendices. And the narrative is section B. That's where the bulk of the narrative is going to be, and that is the section that has a limit of 10 pages. We are asking you to mail an original copy of the grant application with signatures. So we do need a copy of signatures on file at the department. And then we're also asking you to submit your application electronically by secure file transfer. And those directions are included in the RFA on pages 11 and 12 so that you can see, if you've not used secure file transfer, you can see how to do that. They're due by 5 p.m. on that day. And we cannot accept faxed applications. So you're welcome, obviously, to submit it sooner than that. if you have it ready, but it needs to be postmarked. The mailed version needs to be postmarked by August 31st, and then it needs to be electronically submitted by 5 p.m. on August 31st through secure file transfer. As I mentioned, there are several components to the application. The first is a cover page. The cover page of the application is essentially giving us information about the district, or I should say about the project more specifically, the superintendent, the project director, and the fiscal agent. So that information we need, including contact information. We use that information to feed our spreadsheet that we use for communicating with you throughout the course of the grant. Appendix B is an assurances page, and that requires the signature of the superintendent, the local board chair, teachers exclusive bargaining representative, and the project director. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but this really is a grant that is around collaborative work and shared leadership, and those folks all need to be on the same page as you move forward, thinking about how are we going to shift systems in our district around those 4 areas that we discussed that will potentially impact those 4 areas. Everyone that's listed on this assurance page needs to be on board and recognize that those are the conversations that are going to be taking place. Then Appendix C is the school district profile. So you're going to be giving us information about the number of teachers and administrators, your school, the makeup of your school. So we're going to get some demographic information so that we know we can more clearly share who is doing this work and the kinds of environments in which it's taking place. Then the bulk of the application is sections A and B. And section A is the collaborative design team. And I believe I misspoke on this slide, so I'm going to clarify that right now. It says A and B not to exceed 10 pages. And I'm fairly certain that we've said that actually section A is not included in that limit. So I'm just taking a quick look here. No, that's not true. It is included in the limit. Okay, that's good to know. So section A, that's your list of who is participating on your design team. And we really do need a cross-section. I said not included in the 10-page maximum. Okay, well, I think we'll say that it's not included in the 10-page maximum, since that's what it says on the slide here, and I don't anticipate those pages being particularly long. But you do need to include the names of the folks who are participating, their titles, their roles, and we want to make sure that we're getting at all of the folks who need to be involved in the conversation. So we have listed here, if you have English learners in your district, you're going to want at least one representative in that regard. Same would be true with special education. And as I mentioned earlier, bargaining unit representatives. It is a collaborative endeavor, and because we are looking at shared leadership and continuous improvement, a commitment from a broad range of stakeholders is definitely required. Section B is where the bulk of the application resides, and it's really describing your district's readiness for this work. That is what this application is about. As I've mentioned before, and you'll hear me repeat probably at least one more time, this is really about systems, district systems, and thinking about shifting those systems to get at creating support for educators across the spectrum. So we have 5 sections in this part of the application. And we've included in the RFA a prompt for each of those 5. And then we also include some guiding questions to help you think about your responses to each of those. So the first one is about reasons and objectives for participation. essentially, why did you apply for the collaboration grant, and what do you expect to accomplish as a result of that participation. In section B, little b, we ask you to talk about where your district is in relation to the 4 buckets. We sometimes refer to them as the 4 focus areas of leadership, compensation, professional learning, and evaluation. This is really so that you get, it's essentially a baseline for your district of this is where we started when we entered the collaboration grant. This is what our systems looked like in these areas. That's what we're asking you to describe to us. And those guiding questions really get at things like, is teacher leadership understood across your district? Do you have a common vision for what that is and what those opportunities are? What does compensation mean in your district? Is it really just, you know, a sort of a step and rail system, or is it, does it take other forms? Some districts have multiple methodologies in place when they talk about compensation. Professional learning, who drives professional learning? How is your evaluation system connected to that? So all of these questions, guiding questions that are included in there, are really helping us to help you describe what your current systems look like in those 4 areas. Then in the section little c, readiness of stakeholders, as I mentioned, this is definitely a grant that requires commitment across groups, and everyone needs to understand what you're agreeing to discuss and think about. And so we ask you to talk about the commitment of a wide variety of stakeholders. We really have found that you need to be willing to have the kinds of conversations that can sometimes be difficult. And so making sure that everyone's on board with doing that work is important. Then in little section D, commitment of resources. This is really about the design grants, as you know from having looked at the RFA already yourselves. The design grant is that planning year, and it's a fairly modest grant amount in comparison to what implementation looks like. And so we're really asking you to think about what are the ways in which your district will be able to support this work moving forward. Even if you get an implementation grant, where can you leverage funds potentially within your existing systems? Where do you see opportunities for that? And we're also learning it's important to think about how are you going to scale this work and ensure that it lives outside of the end of the grant period. Because if systems don't shift, then those funds, once they go away, what we have seen in some cases is that the work goes away as well. So just thinking about what kind of resources we have that we might be able to commit to this work as we move forward. And then finally, identifying those challenges to implementation, and there will be challenges. So thinking about what you know about your district, and you know, can be from a historical perspective, whatever you know to be the case for why you might, where you might stumble. And that's just a really good thing to think about before you start. And it also helps us, give us a sense of, you know, what kind of thought you're putting into where you might need to be proactive potentially as you move forward. I mentioned earlier that there are 3 quarterly reports that are due in December, March, and June. And we do ask you to share lessons with other districts. Those reports are really asking you to describe the progress you've been making along the way in your design work, and also reflect kind of on the improvement science process and what you're learning as you go forward. In terms of funding, so it is from September through June for the design phase, and projects will be awarded between $20,000 and $50,000 depending on the application and the size of the district to fund your work in this collaborative design process. So as I mentioned, this work is really about designing a plan for what would it look like now that we know what our problems of practice are, now that we know what our root causes have shown us. These are the actions that we think we would need to take to move, to make changes in our system. So that's what you would be funding with this grant. And then finally, as I mentioned, we do have a scoring rubric that's included as Appendix D. And it includes 2 sections. One is just a checklist that essentially ensures, do we have all of the required components, the signatures that we need, have we formatted it correctly? Those are some things that we'll be looking at. And do we have our design team? So that's where I know it is not part of the required 10-page maximum, because it's listed in section, the first section of our rubric. And then section B goes through each of those 5 questions around objectives, current systems, stakeholders, resources, and barriers, and gives you some examples of the kinds of responses that might elicit either a does not meet, an emerging, or a readiness established evaluation. So each of those 5 questions will have its own review based on the rubric. Okay, so now is the opportunity for you to ask questions. I want to make sure that anyone who has a question that I have not answered has a chance to do that. And I see that most people do not have a microphone going, but you are welcome to answer, to type your question into the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions come through. And as is always the case, if you think of something along the way in the process, you are more than welcome to shoot that information my way. So I'll take your silence either as the evidence that I've clearly explained it and you have no questions, or that it's a lot to process and you might have questions as we move forward. In terms of who to talk to, if you have questions about the application itself and the questions within it, or that kind of thing, you would get in touch with me. If you have questions about how to get your application to us and the secure file transfer process, any of those pieces, you would get in touch with Shelley Dumas, who is the support person in our office, who will be receiving these grants and making sure that everything gets filed where it's supposed to go. So with that, I thank you very much for your time. I apologize again for the rocky start and appreciate your goodwill. Oh, I see. How many grants will be awarded? Well, it really depends. As I said, the allocation is $20,000 to $50,000, and we have a certain percentage of the funds earmarked for design. So if we, only get 5 applications, they will likely all be awarded unless there's something in the application that indicates that we feel like readiness is not there. If we get 20 applications, then it would be less likely that they would all be funded. So it really does depend on how many people apply, what the size of those districts is. And in the past, we have had several design applications that have not been funded. So there is precedent for that. Any other questions? Okay, I'm just going to scroll back through and see if there were any questions that.
Sarah?
Yes.
Yes. This is Dale.
Hi, Dale. Hi, Dale.
Is there any other commitment outside of sharing work with other design districts that's required, participating in a network improvement community around professional learning or assessment or something of that nature that's a requirement of the grant, or is it just merely sharing the work you're doing around your design?
Oh, that's a very good question. Thanks, Dale, for such a good leading question. Yes, there is an expectation that you, and I think, Dale, you have muted yourself. Thank you, so that we're not getting that echo. There is an expectation that you are participating in a networked improvement community, and I am going to quickly open up my RFA and go to the section that talks about the responsibilities or what districts will do, so that I get the language right. But you are going to be working in a networked improvement community, so working with other districts in the design and potentially implementation phase. So it will require some meeting, so some off-site time, and we have not established where or when necessarily those will take place, but we are mindful and have tried to be mindful in the past of travel and making sure that there's not too much extended travel for those of you who might be coming a great distance. But yes, there will be an expectation that you'll be working with other design grant recipients. And we've already learned through the most recent version of design, and then those folks moved into year one, we're looking at helping districts get a little bit of a leg up in terms of thinking about a common problem of practice. And so I know that those of you who have met with Julie Smith from the Chalkboard Project are aware that professional learning has been the focus of the next phase of this design grant work. That it's our expectation that as districts engage around problems of practice related to professional learning, that we'll have economies of scale when we do that, that we'll look at a common problem of practice and then contextualize it within each district. And we also expect that some of those other focus areas will surface as we do that. So I do want to make sure that we're clear that we're not necessarily asking districts to come up with a plan for all four of those areas as we have done in the past. But neither are we saying that you would come in and just work on professional learning and nothing else would be addressed moving forward. We do think those other areas will be elevated, and that you'll be able to take a look at making some of those connections across the buckets as you move forward. Any additional questions? Oh, I see someone asked a question whether reviewers are needed for the grant, and so we have identified both internal and external reviewers, so we are covered in that regard. And those will be read, as I mentioned, that first week in September, and then grants will be shared feedback, whether they are funded or not funded. You'll be shared feedback on your grant, on your application, and then you'll be notified about your award. Okay. Again, if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to email or call me with those. And with that, we wish you a pleasant afternoon. And thank you again.
Thank you, Sarah.